The darkness of the German night lingered in Friedrich Müller's memories, even as the American transport ship approached the glowing coastline. Having served as a radio operator in the Wehrmacht, captured near Normandy in the summer of 1944, he had grown accustomed to the pitch black of German cities during air raid precautions. For years, his homeland had lived under strict blackout orders, windows painted dark, streetlights extinguished, even cigarettes cupped in hands to prevent the faintest ember from becoming a beacon for Allied bombers. But as the ship drew closer to the American shore, Friedrich could not comprehend what stretched before him. An entire city ablaze with light, thousands of bulbs forming a glittering constellation against the night sky. He rubbed his eyes, certain he was hallucinating from the weeks at sea. Unmöglich, he whispered to himself. Impossible. Next to him, Hauptmann Weber, once a schoolteacher from Düsseldorf before the war, transformed him into an artillery officer. "They light their cities as if there is no war," he murmured, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and confusion, "as if they have never heard of bombers." The prisoners crowded the deck, pushing against each other for a glimpse of this revelation. Some remained silent, others whispered theories. Perhaps it was a trick, a staged spectacle to demoralize them. Yet, as the transport ship glided toward the dock, the evidence became undeniable. Not just a few buildings, but an entire metropolis illuminated in defiance of darkness. Streetlights outlined boulevards like strings of pearls. Neon signs glowed in vivid reds and blues. Office windows formed grids of light reaching skyward. What madness was this? Had they not been warned of American desperation, of a nation crumbling under resource shortages? How could a country engaged in a global war afford such flagrant waste of electricity? "It is a different world," muttered Corporal Bauer, his voice almost lost beneath the ship's engines. "One that makes no sense." Friedrich's hands trembled as he gripped the railing. The lights reflected in his eyes, burning away certainties that had been drilled into him through years of propaganda. If America could illuminate entire cities while Germany cowered in darkness, what other lies had he been told? What other truths awaited behind the barbed wire of captivity? As the gangplank lowered and armed guards motioned them forward, Friedrich carried this question like a weight in his chest, heavier than any rucksack he had shouldered during the war. The brilliance of the American night would be only the first shock in a cascade of revelations that would dismantle everything he thought he knew about his enemy, and, more painfully, about the Reich that had sent him to war. The captured men shuffled down the gangplank in silence, their eyes still adjusting to the unnatural brightness of the American port. Friedrich had expected rough treatment upon arrival, perhaps beatings, interrogation under harsh lights, or being paraded before jeering crowds. Such were the whispered fears among German soldiers, tales reinforced by Goebbels' propaganda about American savagery. Yet what greeted them instead were orderly lines, efficient processing, and strangely casual guards who seemed almost bored by their new charges. "Name, rank, and unit," requested an American clerk when Friedrich's turn came, the man's tone flat and bureaucratic rather than threatening. No shouting, no rifle butts to the back, just paperwork and photographs, fingerprints, and medical examinations. The efficiency was almost clinical, devoid of the vengeance Friedrich had been taught to expect. Hauptmann Weber, ahead of him in line, later whispered his assessment, "They process us like mail packages, not enemies, as if we are merely inventory to be sorted." The prisoners were herded onto trains, not the cattle cars they feared, but passenger carriages with wooden benches and windows that offered glimpses of the countryside. As they pulled away from the coastal city and traveled inland, Friedrich pressed his face against the glass, watching the landscape transform from urban to rural. Even here, in what seemed like remote farmland, electricity lines stretched along roads, connecting distant farmhouses to the same grid that powered metropolises. "Look there," one of the prisoners nudged him, pointing to a small town they were passing. Despite being no more than a cluster of buildings around the main street, every structure glowed with light. A movie theater's marquee blazed with bulbs outlining the week's feature. Gas stations illuminated their forecourts with brilliant overhead lamps. Even farmhouses standing alone in fields displayed lit windows and porch lights. Friedrich remembered his own village near Stuttgart, where even before the war, electricity had been a limited luxury. Many rural homes still used oil lamps and candles, electricity reserved for essential functions rather than comfort or decoration. Here, it seemed, Americans treated illumination as a birthright, not a privilege. As the train rattled westward through the night, the passengers fell into a stunned silence. The evidence outside their windows contradicted everything they had been told about America: its supposed material shortages, its infrastructural weakness, its inability to sustain a war effort while maintaining civilian comforts. "They told us they were running out of resources," muttered a young private who had fought in North Africa. "That their factories were failing, their workers striking, their supplies dwindling." "They told us many things," Weber replied quietly, his eyes never leaving the illuminated landscape passing beyond the glass. When the train finally stopped at their destination, a camp in the Midwest, even here the lights continued to challenge their expectations. Floodlights illuminated the perimeter of the camp with stark clarity. Guard towers stood like islands of brightness amid the surrounding farmland. Inside the compound, bulbs hung from wires stretched between barracks, creating pathways of light that connected buildings across the camp. Friedrich lay awake that first night, unable to sleep beneath the unfamiliar glow that seeped through barrack windows. Back home, he thought, Germany slept in darkness, waiting for dawn to reveal the newest bomb craters. Here, in the heart of enemy territory, night existed only as a technicality, conquered by the simple flick of a switch. What kind of country could afford such disregard for scarcity? And if they illuminated even prison camps with such abundance, what other resources flowed with equal generosity through this strange nation? The morning revealed a camp constructed with an efficiency that further challenged Friedrich's expectations. The barracks, while simple, were solidly built, with wooden floors rather than dirt, windows that opened to catch summer breezes, and, most surprisingly, electrical outlets along the walls. Even as prisoners, it seemed they would have access to power that many free German citizens lacked. Breakfast brought another shock, not just the abundance of food, which many prisoners had already experienced aboard the transport ship, but the casual use of electrical appliances in the mess hall. Industrial toasters browned bread slices by the dozen. Massive percolators produced coffee in quantities that would have been unthinkable in wartime Germany. In the kitchen, glimpsed through serving hatches, refrigerators hummed, keeping milk and butter cool despite the summer heat. "They electrify even the simplest tasks," observed Corporal Bauer, watching an American cook operate a mechanical potato peeler. "Things we would do by hand, they give to machines." The camp routine gradually revealed further evidence of America's electrical wealth. The administration building housed electric typewriters, their keys clacking as clerks processed endless paperwork. The infirmary contained equipment powered by wall outlets, examination lights, sterilizers, even an X-ray machine in a separate room. Guards carried flashlights as casually as they wore their uniforms, flicking them on at dusk before the compound lights fully brightened. What struck Friedrich most was not simply the prevalence of electricity, but the carelessness with which Americans treated it. Lights remained on in empty rooms. Fans spun in corners, whether or not anyone sat nearby to enjoy their breeze. Radio sets played music throughout the day, drawing power that in Germany would have been carefully rationed. "It is as if they have never known shortage," Weber said one evening, watching a guard absent-mindedly leave a light burning in an empty storage shed. "As if limitation is a foreign concept." Friedrich nodded, remembering the dim evenings in his family home, where a single bulb illuminated the kitchen table around which everyone gathered. Other rooms left dark to conserve precious power. Here, darkness seemed to be the enemy, banished at every opportunity by switches and fixtures. The true scale of America's electrical abundance, however, revealed itself 2 weeks after their arrival, when a work detail was assembled for a nearby canning factory. Friedrich volunteered, eager to escape the monotony of the camp and see more of this puzzling country. What awaited beyond the gates would shake his understanding to its core and plant questions that would haunt him long after the war had ended. The prisoners rode in the back of canvas-covered trucks, guards seated among them with casual alertness. As they traveled through the countryside, Friedrich noticed power lines following every road, branching to farmhouses and barns. Even isolated agricultural structures seemed connected to the invisible grid that fed America's insatiable appetite for electricity. When they reached the small city where the factory stood, the full impact of American electrification became clear. It was not just illumination that electricity enabled, but a way of life utterly foreign to wartime Europe. Traffic signals changed from red to green with mechanical precision. Streetcars hummed along their tracks, drawing power from overhead wires. Storefronts displayed refrigerated cases where meats and dairy products remained fresh despite the summer heat. "Look at that," whispered Corporal Kraus, a baker from Hamburg before conscription claimed him. He pointed to a row of washing machines visible through a laundromat window. Electrical washing for common people, not just factories or hospitals. Friedrich watched women deposit coins, load clothing, and walk away as the machines began their cycles. In Germany, such tasks remained the domain of manual labor, washboards and wringer mangles, hours of physical effort. Here, electricity transformed even the most basic household chores. The canning factory itself delivered the most overwhelming evidence of America's electrical advantage. As the prisoners were assigned to various stations, Friedrich found himself working alongside conveyor belts that moved endlessly, driven by motors larger than any he had seen in civilian life. Automatic sorting machines separated vegetables by size, powered scales measured precise amounts, and an entire system of lights, bells, and switches coordinated the workflow. During their lunch break, Friedrich sat with Weber and Bauer in a corner of the factory canteen, all three men unusually quiet as they ate sandwiches provided by the company. "In my school," Weber finally said, breaking the silence, "we had one radio for the entire building, carefully maintained and only used for important broadcasts. Here, the factory has a radio playing music in each department, as if they were no more valuable than wall clocks." Bauer nodded. "My neighborhood in Munich shared a refrigerator among 4 families. We took turns using it for perishable foods. I count 17 refrigerators in this building alone." Friedrich remembered the pride his village had taken in electrifying the main square, a project that had required fundraising, petitioning the regional government, and months of work. Here, electricity seemed no more remarkable than air or water, simply expected to flow wherever humans decided it should. That evening, as they returned to camp, the truck took a different route, passing through the city's downtown. As dusk fell, Friedrich witnessed something he would later describe in letters home as the moment America became incomprehensible. One by one, then in a cascade, the city's lights flickered to life. Not just street lamps and building illumination, but enormous electric advertisements, theater marquees, department store displays, and restaurant signs, a riot of colored lights transforming the street into a carnival of brightness. "Mein Gott," someone whispered, the words barely audible above the truck's engine. Friedrich felt a tightness in his chest, a physical response to the cognitive dissonance between what he had been taught about America and what his eyes now recorded. If a small Midwestern city could burn this much electricity merely for advertisement and decoration, while German cities lay in darkness and rubble, what did that reveal about the true balance of power in this global conflict? The trucks returned them to the camp, which now seemed almost dim compared to the city's blaze of light. That night, lying in his bunk, Friedrich recorded his thoughts in a small notebook he kept hidden beneath his mattress. They use in frivolity what we ration as precious. They illuminate the night as if darkness were an enemy already defeated. What chance did we ever have against a nation that treats scarcity as a forgotten memory? The prisoners rarely discussed these observations aloud, as if speaking them might constitute a betrayal of the homeland. Yet, in the quiet moments, meal times, work details, evening hours before sleep, their shared awareness hung in the air, unspoken but understood. The America they were experiencing bore no resemblance to the America described by Nazi propaganda, and this contradiction planted seeds of doubt about everything else they had been told. Private Hoffman, barely 20 and captured in his first week of combat, was the first to give voice to these thoughts. During a break from kitchen duty, he sat beside Friedrich, peeling potatoes with a mechanical efficiency learned over weeks of similar assignments. "My father," he said quietly, "told me before I left that America was a paper tiger, impressive at a distance but hollow inside. That they had wealth but no will to fight, luxury but no capacity to endure hardship." He gestured toward the kitchen where industrial mixers prepared dough for the evening meal. "But I have seen no paper here. Only steel and electricity and abundance." Sergeant Richter, a career soldier with service dating back to the early 30s, overheard the comment. "Careful, boy. Such talk borders on treason." "Is observation treason?" Hoffman challenged, his youth making him bolder than the others. "Is it disloyal to see what stands before my eyes?" "It is disloyal to question what our leaders have told us," Richter replied, but his voice lacked conviction, as if he too struggled to reconcile propaganda with reality. Friedrich remained silent, turning a potato in his hands. He thought of his brother, still fighting somewhere in France, or perhaps already dead. Had he died for truth or for carefully constructed lies? The question felt dangerous, corrosive to everything Friedrich had believed. Later that week, during a rare treat, a movie shown in the camp's recreation hall, Friedrich experienced another dimension of America's electrical wealth. The film projector, a marvel of technology to many of the prisoners, cast images onto a white sheet hung from the ceiling. American comedies and newsreels flickered before an audience that alternated between laughter and stunned silence as footage of massive industrial production revealed the scale of the Allied war effort. "They filmed their factories," Weber noted afterward, as prisoners filed back to their barracks. "They show us exactly how many tanks, planes, and ships they produce. They hide nothing because they fear nothing." One newsreel had showcased the Tennessee Valley Authority, an electrification project of staggering ambition. Enormous dams harnessed rivers to generate power for regions that, the narrator proudly declared, had once lived without modern conveniences. The scale dwarfed anything Friedrich had seen in Germany, where the Reich's infrastructure projects, well celebrated in propaganda, focused primarily on military needs rather than civilian electrification. "They build power for villages while we build bunkers," observed Bauer. "They expand while we fortify." The camp's interpreter, an American sergeant of German descent named Mueller, overheard the comment. Instead of reprimanding them, he paused, then added his own perspective. "My grandparents lived in Bavaria before coming to Wisconsin," he said. "They wrote home about electricity in our farmhouse in 1925. Their relatives in Germany didn't get power until 1938, and even then it was limited. America made electricity for everyone a priority decades ago. It wasn't for war, it was because we believed every home deserved light." The concept seemed almost naive to Friedrich. Resources distributed for comfort rather than strategic advantage. Yet the evidence surrounded them. A nation so electrically wealthy that even prisoners of war benefited from its abundance. As autumn approached, the prisoners were occasionally transported to harvest crops from nearby farms. These journeys provided further glimpses into American rural life, where electricity had transformed agriculture just as dramatically as it had changed cities. Farms boasted electric milking machines, grain augers, water pumps, and barn lighting that extended workdays beyond sunset. During one such excursion, Friedrich worked alongside a farmer named Johnson, whose operation spanned hundreds of acres. As they loaded corn onto a mechanized conveyor that carried it into a storage silo, Friedrich gathered the courage to ask a question that had bothered him for weeks. "Aren't you concerned about using so much electricity during wartime? About shortages or rationing?" Johnson looked puzzled, then laughed. "Son, we're generating more power now than ever before. New dams coming online, new plants being built. War production needs it, so we make more." That's the American way. We don't divide a small pie into smaller pieces. We bake a bigger pie. The answer reflected an outlook so foreign to Friedrich's experience that he struggled to process it. In Germany, wartime meant ever-increasing sacrifice, resources dwindling as the conflict dragged on. The concept of expansion during war, of growing capacity rather than managing decline, seemed almost miraculous. That evening, watching the camp's lights come on automatically at dusk, no human hand required to ignite each lamp, Friedrich felt a profound sense of disorientation. The world he had left behind in Germany, with its carefully managed scarcity and martial discipline, seemed increasingly distant, almost fictional compared to the electrified reality of America. "We are not just separated by an ocean," he wrote in his hidden journal. "We are separated by decades of development, by fundamentally different approaches to resource and society. They fight this war with the lights on. We fight in darkness." The contrast grew sharper as winter approached and temperatures dropped across the Midwest. In the barracks, electric heaters maintained comfortable warmth despite howling winds outside. Hot showers remained available daily, the water heated by enormous electric boilers. Even the paths between buildings were illuminated all night, allowing movement regardless of weather or hour. Friedrich recalled winters in Germany before the war when his family heated only the main room of their house, bedrooms left cold until shortly before sleep. Electricity had been too expensive to use for heating. Wood and coal served instead. Here, in the heart of America, even captives enjoyed thermal comfort that free German citizens would have considered luxurious. The realization crystallized during a particularly severe blizzard in December, when the camp was cut off from the outside world for 3 days. Despite heavy snow and howling winds, electricity never faltered. Lights remained steady, heat continued to flow, and routine proceeded with minimal disruption. "Even their weather cannot defeat their power grid," Weber remarked, watching through frosted windows as camp personnel cleared snow using electric blowers rather than shovels. "What does that say about our chances against their armies?" The question hung in the air, uncomfortable but impossible to dismiss. If America's civilian infrastructure displayed such resilience and abundance, what did that suggest about their military capacity? The propaganda image of a soft, decadent society unprepared for the hardships of war collapsed beneath the evidence of a nation whose basic comforts exceeded Germany's wartime aspirations. During their captivity, a particularly revealing moment occurred when several prisoners were assigned to clerical work in the camp's administration office. There, they encountered yet another dimension of America's electrical advancement: information processing machines that used punch cards to sort and categorize data about thousands of prisoners across multiple camps. These IBM machines, with their clicking relays and spinning readers, processed in minutes what would have required days of manual effort. Friedrich watched in fascination as an American clerk fed cards into the sorter, which immediately separated them based on nationality, rank, and capture location. "Your entire military career reduced to holes in paper," Weber observed, his academic background giving him quicker understanding of the system than most. "And electricity reads it faster than any human could." The administrative staff explained that similar systems tracked everything from military supplies to civilian ration cards, factory production to hospital records. The scale of information management seemed impossibly advanced compared to the paper ledgers and manual filing systems Friedrich had known in the Wehrmacht. This is how they coordinate a global war, Weber said later, his voice low as they discussed what they'd seen. Not with shouting officers and rigid hierarchy, but with machines that never sleep, never forget, and never lose track of a single bullet or bandage. Friedrich nodded, remembering the chaos he had witnessed during the retreat from Normandy. Supply chains broken, units losing contact with headquarters, equipment abandoned because no one knew where it should go. America's electrical information systems represented a different kind of warfare entirely, one where knowledge flowed as freely as electricity itself. As Christmas approached, the camp underwent a transformation that seemed designed to further undermine German assumptions about American resource limitations. Strings of colored lights appeared along roof lines and wound around the few trees within the compound. An enormous Christmas tree, erected in the mess hall, blazed with electric bulbs in red, green, and blue, topped with a star that remained illuminated day and night. "Such waste," muttered Sergeant Richter, though his eyes lingered on the colored patterns with undisguised wonder. "Not waste," corrected a younger prisoner named Schmidt, who had worked in the camp office. "Statement. They show us their abundance because they can. Because even in war, they need not count bulbs or measure watts." Friedrich thought of his last Christmas in Germany, celebrated beneath blackout curtains with candles carefully rationed, each gift wrapped in paper saved from the previous year. The contrast with America's electrified holiday display felt like a personal rebuke, as if the very lights mocked the austerity he had accepted as necessary patriotism. The camp commander, a Colonel Harris, addressed the prisoners on Christmas Eve, his speech translated phrase by phrase. What struck Friedrich was not the content, largely platitudes about peace and eventual return home, but the casual confidence with which the Americans spoke of victory as inevitable, not through superior ideology or fighting spirit, but through overwhelming industrial capacity. "The Reich tells us we must sacrifice to win," Weber whispered afterward. "The Americans act as if winning requires no sacrifice at all, merely patience as their factories outproduce our entire continent." That night, lying awake beneath the unusual brightness of holiday decorations, Friedrich confronted the question that had grown within him since his first glimpse of America's illuminated coastline. Had Germany ever had a chance against such a nation? A country that could afford to light Christmas trees for prisoners while German cities lay in darkness seemed to exist in a different reality altogether, one where material constraints, the basic limiting factor of warfare throughout history, had somehow been overcome. The thought felt treasonous, yet inescapable. It nestled in his consciousness, reshaping his understanding of the conflict that had claimed his youth and might yet claim his life. The electric lights of America had illuminated not just their cities and camps, but the fundamental misconception at the heart of Germany's war effort. The new year brought rumors of Germany's deteriorating position, whispers that spread through the camp despite official news blackouts. American guards, perhaps intentionally, left newspapers where prisoners might glimpse headlines about the collapse of the Ardennes offensive, the advance of Soviet forces on the Eastern Front, and the relentless bombing of German industry. During this period, Friedrich and several other prisoners received an unexpected opportunity, a supervised visit to a nearby town to provide labor for a municipal project. Under guard but without shackles, they boarded trucks one crisp January morning, uncertain what awaited them. The town, though small by German standards, displayed the now familiar signs of America's electrical prosperity. Traffic lights controlled intersections. Trolley cars moved on electrified lines. Shops advertised their presence with illuminated signs, visible even in daylight. Their assignment proved to be installation of decorative lighting in the town square, a bitter irony that several prisoners noted with quiet remarks. While German cities lay in rubble, this Midwestern town concerned itself with aesthetics, with making public spaces not just functional but beautiful through the application of electricity. Working alongside American electricians, Friedrich gained insights into the system that powered this seemingly limitless supply of energy. The lead electrician, a middle-aged man named Thompson, explained aspects of the grid as they worked. How power flowed from distant hydroelectric dams and coal plants, how transformers stepped voltage up for transmission and down for local use, how safety systems prevented overloads. Before the war, Thompson mentioned casually, we were electrifying about 1,000 new farms every month in this state alone. Had to pause the rural program to focus on war production, but we'll get back to it soon enough. Presidents promised electricity for every American home eventually. The casual certainty of this vision, universal electrification as an assumed right rather than a distant luxury, struck Friedrich deeply. His own village had celebrated connection to the national grid as a momentous achievement. Here, it was simply expected, like running water or paved roads. As dusk fell, they witnessed the full impact of their day's work. The square illuminated gradually as switches were thrown, revealing carefully placed lights that highlighted a central statue, illuminated pathways, and created a welcoming public space despite winter's early darkness. "Beautiful, isn't it?" asked Thompson, standing back to admire the effect. "Folks will be able to use the square even after sunset now. Kids can play longer, old-timers can sit and chat, young couples can stroll. Electricity extends the day." Friedrich nodded, unable to articulate how strange this purpose seemed. Lights for community, for leisure, for the simple pleasure of evening social life. In Germany, such usage would have been condemned as decadent during peacetime, criminal during war. On the return journey to camp, the trucks drove a different route, passing through residential neighborhoods where dinner preparations were visible through uncurtained windows. Families gathered in fully illuminated rooms, electric stoves prepared meals, radios provided entertainment, and not a single home showed signs of the conservation that had become second nature to Europeans. "They live as if there is no war," Hoffman said, his voice mixing envy and bewilderment. "As if shortages exist only in fairy tales." Friedrich didn't respond immediately, his attention caught by a scene in a particular home. A mother helping children with homework beneath a bright reading lamp, the entire table bathed in light that would have been reserved for critical military planning in Germany. "No," he finally replied, "they live as if they've already won." The observation settled heavily among the prisoners in the truck, each man retreating into his own thoughts as they returned to the camp. That night, beneath the steady glow of barrack lights that never fully darkened, Friedrich added to his hidden journal, "They wage war without darkness. We stumble through darkness, calling it strength. Which nation would you wager on?" As winter gave way to spring, subtle changes appeared in the attitudes and conversations of the German prisoners. The initial shock of America's electrical abundance had faded somewhat, replaced by a more profound reassessment of everything they had once believed about both their enemy and their homeland. Some, like Sergeant Richter, retreated into a hardened defense of Reich ideology, insisting that America's material wealth masked spiritual poverty and racial degeneracy. But these voices grew increasingly isolated as evidence of Germany's collapsing position became impossible to deny. Others, particularly younger prisoners like Hoffman, embraced American patterns with surprising enthusiasm, adopting English phrases, requesting books about electrical engineering, and openly discussing post-war life in a rebuilt Germany that might emulate American infrastructure. Friedrich found himself somewhere between these extremes, neither rejecting his national identity nor fully embracing American values, but increasingly questioning the worldview that had led Germany into a war it could not possibly win. The electric lights that had first stunned him now served as constant reminders of the profound miscalculation at the heart of the conflict. "We believed in will over matter," he wrote in his journal during those final months of the war, "in spirit over material, in determination over resources. The lights of America expose this as childish fantasy." No amount of courage can overcome such disparity of power. News of Germany's surrender reached the camp on May 8, 1945. The announcement came over the camp's public address system, itself a display of electrical technology that few German military facilities could match. The prisoners received the information with complex emotions: relief that the killing had stopped, grief for a homeland now occupied, uncertainty about what awaited them upon eventual repatriation. That evening, instead of the usual dimming of lights for sleep, the camp remained fully illuminated. Whether intended as celebration or merely coincidental, the effect was powerful, a final statement about the fundamental asymmetry of the concluded conflict. Germany had ended the war in literal darkness, its power plants bombed, its grid disrupted, its cities reduced to rubble. America had concluded the same war bathed in light, its infrastructure not merely intact but expanded. Some prisoners wept quietly in their bunks. Others engaged in hushed conversations about families not heard from in months, about cities they might return to find unrecognizable. Friedrich sat alone near a window, watching moths gather around the exterior lights, drawn helplessly to the brightness as if by some irresistible force. He thought of the German word Götterdämmerung, the twilight of the gods, the end of an era in fire and darkness. The Reich had embraced this mythic vision of heroic last stands and valiant defeat. But America had offered a different narrative entirely. Not dramatic destruction, but relentless construction. Not glorious death, but practical life. Not darkness, but ever-increasing light. In the years that followed, as Friedrich and his fellow prisoners gradually returned to a Germany struggling to rebuild from total defeat, many carried with them the memory of America's illuminated abundance. Some, like Weber, would eventually emigrate, seeking opportunities in the nation whose power grid had first revealed to them a different conception of modern society. Others, Friedrich among them, remained to help reconstruct their homeland, applying lessons learned during captivity. When he finally returned to his village near Stuttgart in 1947, he found it still struggling with intermittent electricity and limited capacity. His first community project, organized with other returning veterans, was improving the local distribution network to bring reliable power to homes that had never known it before. "We thought we were fighting America," he later told his children and grandchildren, "but we were really fighting against the future, against a world where power flows not from speeches and flags, but from dams and plants and wires." It was a battle we could never have won. The most profound legacy of those nights spent beneath America's electric glow was not technological, but philosophical. The recognition that true national strength derives not from willpower or ideology alone, but from the practical systems that support daily life. The prisoners who had once stared in disbelief at illuminated American cities returned to Germany with a vision of what their own country might become once freed from the darkness of both literal blackouts and figurative blind allegiance. Perhaps you have family stories of your own, grandparents who witnessed similar moments of revelation during history's darkest chapter, who carried home insights that transformed not just their personal perspectives, but entire societies. These quiet epiphanies, more than grand battles or political speeches, form the hidden connections between former enemies who discovered, often in unexpected circumstances, their common humanity and shared aspirations for a world where darkness, in all its forms, no longer holds dominion.